There are families that celebrate everything, and families that celebrate selectively. Mine had a system I did not understand until I was old enough to see it clearly, and by the time I saw it, I had already built my entire life around trying to earn my way out of it. I am 38 years old. I have a good job, a small apartment on Meridian Hill, and a framed certificate from the Ohio State program that took me 4.5 years of night classes to finish. I also have a younger sister named Petra, who has never once in her adult life planned a party for herself, because our parents have always done it for her. I am not bitter about that. I am specific about it. There is a difference, and it took me a long time to learn it. The story I want to tell you starts on a Thursday in April, but it has roots that go back much further than that. It goes back to a dining room table in a house on Crestwood Avenue in Cincinnati, where a family of 4 sat down to dinner most nights, and 2 of those 4 people were treated as though they occupied entirely different weight classes of human worth. I should tell you who I am, so you understand what I was working with. My name is Rosalind Fairhaven, and I grew up the older daughter of Dennis and Marjorie Fairhaven, in a beige ranch-style house with a backyard that sloped toward a drainage ditch we were not allowed to play near. My father was a project estimator for a mid-sized construction firm. My mother stayed home until Petra started kindergarten, then took a part-time job at a dental office answering phones. We were not a wealthy family. We were comfortable in the way that means there was always food but also always a ceiling, and you felt the ceiling most when you reached for something. Petra was born when I was 4 years old, and I would be lying if I said I remembered a moment when she was not the gravitational center of our household. That sounds like sibling resentment. I want to be precise. It was not that my parents loved her more in some formless, inexplicable way. It was that they organized their attention around her in patterns I could see from the time I was 9 or 10. Petra's school plays got both parents in the front row. Mine got my mother alone, arriving 12 minutes late because she had dropped Petra at a friend's house first. Petra's birthday parties had themes, printed invitations, a cake ordered from the bakery on Vine Street. Mine had store-bought sheet cake and whatever decorations my mother found in the clearance bin from the previous holiday. I did not cry about it. I did not make a scene. I learned very early that making a scene got you called dramatic, and being called dramatic was the fastest way to lose what little attention you already had. I think I understand now, in my late 30s, what drove my mother. She would not describe it this way herself, but I believe Petra reminded her of who she wanted to be when she was young. Petra was social and quick to laugh and comfortable walking into rooms the way some people just are. My mother had been shy as a girl. She told me once, while we were doing dishes, that she spent most of high school terrified of being wrong about something in front of other people. I think she looked at Petra and saw a version of herself that had gotten out. And I think she looked at me and saw someone who seemed fine on her own, so she let me be fine on my own over and over and over until fine became invisible. My father followed my mother's lead in most things. He was not a cruel man. He was a man who came home tired and sat in his chair and let the emotional organization of the household belong to someone else. So when my mother decided which milestones mattered and whose accomplishments warranted a crowd, he drove to the venue and paid the deposit, and that was the full extent of his engagement with the question. I left Cincinnati for Columbus at 22 for a junior coordinator position at a logistics company. I was not running for my family. I was running towards something, which is a distinction I had to make deliberately because, for a long time, even I could not tell the difference. Over the next 16 years, I moved twice, went back to school at night while working full-time, earned a certification in instructional design, and eventually landed a senior manager role in learning and development at a mid-sized financial services company with offices in Cincinnati and Indianapolis. I moved back to Cincinnati 3 years ago. It seemed like the reasonable choice. My parents were getting older. I had a good salary. I had space. What I also had, though I would not have named it this way at the time, was a quiet accumulation of evidence about what my presence in the city would cost me. My first year back, I got promoted to Director of Talent Development. I called my mother from the parking garage at 4:47 in the afternoon. She said, "Oh, that's good, honey. Are you coming for dinner Sunday? Petra's making that pasta." That was November. I filed the conversation away and did not take it out again for several months. The inciting incident, The thing that finally moved me from accumulating evidence to deciding to do something with it happened on a Thursday afternoon in the first week of April. Petra called me herself, which she did not always do. She was excited. I could hear it in her voice, that bright particular frequency she has when something good has happened to her, and she is still deciding how to contain it. She had been promoted. Regional sales lead, covering 6 states. It was a real achievement. I told her so. I meant it. I knew how much she had worked for it over the past 2 years, and I had watched her grow into someone more serious and more capable than the girl I remembered from Crestwood Avenue. "Mom's already planning something," Petra said, with a laugh in her voice that suggested she had not done anything to discourage this. "You know how she gets." I said I did know. That Sunday, I drove out for dinner because that is what I did on Sundays because I was 38 years old and trying to be a present daughter. My mother was on the phone in the kitchen when I arrived, and I could hear her talking through the hallway, so I set my jacket on the hook by the door. The navy wool coat with the missing 3rd button, the one I kept meaning to replace, and I went and sat at the kitchen table with my father, who was reading something on his tablet and did not look up when I sat down. My mother came in 10 minutes later, still glowing from whatever conversation she'd just had. She set a notepad on the counter, a yellow legal pad, covered in her small looping handwriting, and she said, without preamble, "I've booked the private room at Harrington's. Saturday the 19th. I'm thinking 40 people, sit-down dinner, floral centerpieces." I said, "That sounds beautiful for Petra." My mother said, "She worked so hard for this. You know how much she needed it." I said, "I know." I picked up my tea. The Earl Grey tin was on the table, the one with the small dent on the lid that had been there since my first year back in Cincinnati, and I poured myself a cup, and I let the moment settle. Because here is what I had not said aloud, not yet, not to anyone. For weeks earlier, I had been promoted to Vice President of People Development. It was a role that did not exist at my company before they created it for me. It came with a new team, a restructured reporting line, and a salary increase of $23,400 annually. I had worked toward it for 4 years. I had done 2 rounds of interviews, including one that required me to fly to Indianapolis on a Tuesday and present a 30-slide capability framework to a room of 7 senior executives. I got the offer on a Wednesday morning at 8:14, and I cried in my car in the parking garage for 11 minutes before I called anyone. I had told my family 3 weeks before the Sunday dinner. My mother had sent a card. It arrived on a Thursday. On the front was a watercolor of tulips. Inside it said, in her handwriting so proud, "Roz, keep going." 2 sentences. No call. No dinner. No yellow legal pad. I sat at my parents' kitchen table that Sunday, and I listened to my mother describe the florist she had chosen for Petra's centerpieces. "Roses and white peonies," she said, because Petra loves peonies, and I realized something I had been circling for a long time, without landing on it. It was not going to change. Not because my parents were monsters. Not because they did not love me in whatever form love had taken in their household. It was not going to change because they had organized themselves around a story for so long that the story was the only thing they knew how to follow. And I could either keep arriving at this table and waiting to be written into it differently, or I could go write my own. I drove home that afternoon with the radio off. I did not cry. I did not call anyone. I did not compose the speech in my head that I had composed 17 times over the years and never delivered. I just drove, and by the time I turned onto Meridian Hill and pulled into my parking spot, I had made a decision that was so quiet and so certain that it did not feel like a decision at all. It felt like something I had already done. I called Cardwell's at 9 the next morning. I had been there once for a colleague's retirement dinner, and I remembered the private room in the back. 12 tables, warm lighting, good acoustics, a staff that did not make you feel like you had to hurry. The coordinator, a woman named Bridget, told me the room was available on Saturday the 19th. I booked it for 7 o'clock. 20 covers. I put the reservation confirmation in the green folder I keep in my kitchen drawer, next to the receipt from my parking pass and the lease renewal I hadn't filed yet. Then I went to work. Over the next 2 weeks, I made a list. Not a performance of a list. Not the kind you make when you're trying to impress yourself, just a real accounting of who in my life had shown up for me in the ways that counted. My manager, Diane Chun, who had spent 4 months building the case for my VP role with HR before I even knew it was being discussed. Gil Reyes, my mentor of 7 years, who had flown from Seattle for my first major presentation at this company and stayed 3 hours longer than he planned just to debrief with me. Nessa Okafor, my closest friend from my Columbus years, who had driven down 4 weeks ago to take me to dinner when I got the offer because she said a promotion like that deserved a witness. My Aunt Cora, my father's sister, who was the only person in my extended family who had ever asked me specifically about my work, not just how's the job, but actually asked and listened and remembered what I told her from one conversation to the next. I also invited 7 colleagues who had been part of the Capability Framework project. I invited 2 women from my night school cohort who had finished around the same time I did. I invited a former direct report who had gotten her own promotion 3 months ago, partly because of things I had taught her. And I invited 3 more people who had simply, over the years, been present in the way that presence deserves to be named. I sent the invitations on a Wednesday evening. By Thursday afternoon, I had 18 confirmations. By Friday morning, 20. I told no one in my family. That Thursday night, 9 days before the dinner, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open to the seating chart, and I stopped. It was 11:22 p.m. I had a glass of water I had not touched, and the green folder was open in front of me, and the cursor was blinking in the notes field where I was trying to write something for the toasts. And I just stopped. I sat there, and I thought about the tulip card. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone the afternoon I called from the parking garage. That flat, pleasant, moving on quality, the way she had shifted from my news to Petra's pasta in the same breath. I thought about the 14 times I had driven to that house on Crestwood Avenue since moving back to Cincinnati, and the ratio of times I had been asked something real versus the times I had sat there as a kind of furniture, present and accounted for, and quietly unremarked upon. And then I thought, what if nobody comes? Not the 20 people who had RSVP'd. I knew they were coming. I mean, what if, in some deeper sense, this turns out to be a performance for an audience that isn't really watching? What if I throw this dinner, and it's just me, surrounded by people who are there because I asked, and the emptiness I'm trying to fill stays exactly where it is? I sat with that for a while. The apartment was very quiet. The copper kettle on my stove was catching the overhead light in the way it does at night when everything else is dark. I thought about calling Nessa, but it was almost midnight, and she had a 7-year-old, so I didn't. I thought about what I was actually afraid of, and the honest answer was this. I was afraid that the thing I needed to be seen, specifically by my own family, was never going to happen, and that throwing a dinner with 20 other people was a way of trying to receive something from strangers that I should have been given at home. I was afraid the dinner would be beautiful and meaningful, and I would still drive back past my parents' house on the way home and feel the same particular ache. And then I thought, yes, probably. Maybe that ache doesn't go away. But there are 20 people who said yes in less than 48 hours. That is a fact. The card on my counter has 2 sentences and no call. That is also a fact. I am 38 years old, and I have built a department and a practice and a career that I am genuinely proud of, and I can choose to keep waiting for my family to hand me the recognition, or I can build a table and sit at it. I closed the laptop. I finished the water. I went to bed. Saturday, April 19th. I was at Cardwell's at 5:30 to walk through the setup with Bridget. The private room had been arranged exactly as I had described. Round tables for conversation, not the long banquet style, with small votives in the center and a sprig of something green, rosemary, Bridget said, because I had mentioned I wanted it to feel like something real and not like a corporate function. She had printed small place cards with first names only. She had saved space at the front for a standing area where people could speak. Diane arrived first, at 6:47. She had brought her husband, and a bottle of wine I recognized as expensive without knowing the label. She hugged me at the door and said, I have been waiting for a reason to celebrate this properly. Gil texted me at 6:53 from the cab. He had landed at CVG at 5:30. I had not asked him to fly in. I had simply sent the invitation and told him no obligation. It was a long way to come. His response had been, I've flown for less. He walked in at 7:04 with his jacket over one arm and that particular look he gets when he is genuinely pleased to be somewhere, and he walked straight to me and said, You look like a VP. I laughed. I hadn't laughed like that in weeks. By 7:15, all 20 seats were filled. Aunt Cora was at the table nearest the window. Nessa was holding court at the center table, already making someone laugh. My two night school friends, Juno and Patricia, were in the corner catching up on something that had apparently been going on since a group chat I was only partially part of. The room was warm and loud in the specific way that only happens when the people in it actually want to be there. Diane spoke first. She stood without ceremony and said that she had been in talent development for 19 years, and she had known maybe 6 people in her career who understood instinctively how to build a learning culture rather than just a training calendar. She said I was one of them. She said she had spent 4 months making the case for my VP role, and that every conversation she had with leadership confirmed what she already knew, that I had been underleveled for 2 years, and this was simply the correction. Gil went next. He talked about the first presentation he had ever seen me give at a regional conference in Columbus, which he said he had gone to expecting very little from the afternoon slot. He said I had stood up in front of a room of 200 people and delivered 40 minutes on capability mapping without notes, and that the director sitting next to him had leaned over and asked who I was. He said, "I have been answering that question for 7 years, and the answer keeps getting better." I did not cry during either of those speeches. I will be honest, I was close twice, but I held it. Not because I was performing composure, but because I was genuinely present in a way I had not been present at a family dinner in a very long time, and I did not want to miss any of it. At 8:43, my phone lit up on the table. It was Petra. I did not answer it at the table. I stepped out to the hallway near the restrooms, pressed my back against the cool wall, and picked up. "Where are you?" she said. "At dinner," I said. "A celebration for my promotion." There was a pause. "Mom didn't say anything about this." "Mom didn't know," I said. Another pause. I could hear voices in the background, her party, winding down. Harrington's closed the private room at 9. It was 8:43. "Roz," she said, and her voice had shifted into something more careful. "Why didn't you tell anyone?" "I told 20 people," I said. "They all came." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Our party's basically done. It started at 6. I said, "I hope it was good, Petra. I really mean that. I'm proud of what you've accomplished." She said, "Are you angry at me?" And here is what I said, because I had thought about it without meaning to, the way you think about things when you've been carrying them for a long time. "I'm not angry at you. I love you. But I've been waiting a long time for someone in our family to notice what I've built, and I decided to stop waiting. That's not about you." She didn't say anything for a moment. I said, "I should get back. My mentor flew in from Seattle." I heard her exhale. "Then, he flew in?" "Yes," I said. "For you. For me." I went back inside. Gil was telling a story I had already heard twice that made everyone laugh both times. Aunt Cora was talking to Nessa like they had known each other for years. The rosemary on the tables had been making the whole room smell faintly of something I would not have thought to name, but that I would remember exactly. The calls started the following Tuesday. My mother called at 9:17 in the morning. I was at my desk. I let it go to voicemail, then listen on my lunch break. The message was 4 minutes long. She said she hadn't known I'd planned something. She said she would have come if she'd known. She said she didn't understand why I hadn't told them, and that it made her feel like I was excluding them on purpose. And didn't I know that she was proud of me because and here she paused for a long time, she just didn't always know how to show it the way I needed. That last part was the most honest thing I had heard her say in 15 years. I sat with it. I called her back that evening. I did not make a speech. I did not deliver the accumulated evidence of 20-something years. I said, "Mom, when you announced Petra's promotion party and I was sitting 3 feet away, you did not ask me once how I was feeling about my own promotion. It was 4 weeks old at that point. I needed to be celebrated by people who would actually show up. So, I found those people." She was quiet. "I'm not asking you to feel bad," I said. "I'm telling you what happened because I think you should know." She said, "I didn't realize." "I know you didn't," I said. "That's the part that's been hard." We talked for another 20 minutes. It was not a resolution. It was a beginning of something more honest than what had been there before. She cried a little. I did not. I sat on my couch with the framed certificate from night school visible from where I was sitting. It's on the wall beside the bookshelf, in a simple black frame I bought at the hardware store, and I looked at it while she talked, and I thought about the 4.5 years it had taken me to earn it, most of them invisible to the people who were supposed to be paying attention. My father called 2 days later.
He was shorter about it.
He said, "Your mother told me what you said. I think you were right. I'm sorry we weren't there." 5 sentences. He was not a man of long conversations, but it was more than I had expected from him, and I took it. Petra texted me on Thursday. She said, "I keep thinking about what you said. About waiting. I think I've known something was off for a long time, and I just didn't want to look at it because looking at it felt like choosing a side.
I don't want to lose you, Roz."
I wrote back, "You won't. But I need you to see me. Not just call when you want to talk about yourself. Actually see me." She said, "I'm working on it." I believed her. I also knew that believing her and trusting the pattern were two different things, and that I would need to watch the pattern over time. Aunt Cora had said something to me before she left Cardwell's that night, standing by the coat check, pulling on her jacket. She said, "I've been watching your family for 30 years, Roz. Tonight was the first night I've seen you in a room where nobody was asking you to be smaller." She buttoned her jacket and added, "Hold on to whatever you did to get here." I have been trying to figure out how to describe what the following weeks felt like, and the closest I can get is this. I did not feel victorious. I did not feel healed. What I felt was located. Like I had finally put myself on a map I had been drawing for years without knowing where I was on it. My team sent me flowers the Monday after the dinner, something Diane had apparently organized, 12 stems of something orange that I didn't know the name of, but kept on my desk until they dried, and then kept for a week more because I wasn't ready to throw them out. Nessa texted me every day that week for no reason, except that she said she was thinking about me. Gil and I had a video call on the following Wednesday where we talked for 2 hours about the next phase of the department I was building, and somewhere in the middle of it I realized that the professional life I had spent the last 16 years constructing had its own gravity now, its own pulling force, entirely independent of whether my parents understood it. There is something I have been thinking about a lot in the months since April. Some kindnesses are loans the lender forgets they're keeping. My parents gave me many things growing up. Food, structure, a certain kind of discipline, a sense that hard work was its own reward. What they did not give me was recognition. And I spent a long time treating the absence of recognition as a kind of debt I was waiting for them to pay back, rather than something I could simply go and find somewhere else. A family will tell you blood is thicker than water until the day blood asks them to give something up. My family was not malicious. They were patterned. They had organized themselves around a center of gravity so long ago that they had forgotten there was any other way for a family to be oriented. Walking back into that gravity after 16 years away was my choice, and I own it. But I do not have to keep organizing my life around what it will and will not notice. Love that demands you shrink is not love. It is management. I was managed for a long time, mostly by people who were not even aware that they were doing it. Understanding that did not make me angry. It made me specific. And being specific, knowing exactly what I had not been given and exactly where I had found it, turned out to be the most useful thing I ever did. I went back to Sunday dinner 3 weeks later. My mother had made something more careful that night, asked me twice how the new role was going, asked about the team I was building, asked about Gil in a way that suggested Petra had told her about the mentorship. It was not a transformation. It was an adjustment. I sat at the table and I answered her questions, and I thought, this is what conditional improvement looks like, and it is enough for now, and it does not require me to give anything up. Boundaries are not walls. They are doors, and you get to decide who walks through. I opened mine just wide enough for what my family could honestly give, and I stopped waiting for them to knock down the parts they had never been willing to reach. The certificate on my wall says Learning and Development, Ohio State, completed May 2021. 4.5 years. 16 Thursday nights a semester. A lot of Sundays when I drove to Cincinnati and then drove back and sat with the studying until midnight because there was nobody else to stay up with me. It is a simple black frame. I bought it at the hardware store for $14. It is the most expensive thing in my apartment, and the price tag has nothing to do with money. Family is whoever shows up when there is nothing to gain. I know mine now. They filled 20 seats on a Saturday night in April. Some of them have known me for years. Some came in from out of town. Some texted me every day for a week afterward for no reason except that they could. If you have ever stood in a room where people were celebrating someone else while everything you had built sat quietly in your chest, waiting to be named, I want you to hear this. You are allowed to throw your own party. You are allowed to fill the room with people who already know your name. You are allowed to stop waiting for the recognition to come from the place that has never known how to give it. The question I keep returning to is this. If the people you were born to never learned how to see you, would you spend the rest of your life trying to teach them, or would you build something bright enough that you stop needing them to look?